So yes, very spooky general superstition around things like the number 13 and especially Friday the 13th. So today we'll have Mrs. Wheeler talking about theater superstitions. Personally, in my Theater 1 class last year, 2 years ago, we ran out of time to talk about theater superstitions, and I thought the Founders Forum is a great place where she could talk about that kind of thing. Yes, we do ask that y'all do fill up the front, but it's all right. I think we're good now. Please do be respectful and pay attention. Engage with Mrs. Wheeler if she asks for questions and participation. And without further ado, Mrs. Wheeler.
Okay, so I was very excited when Matthew came and asked me if I would give this talk. This is probably one of the more popular theater history lessons that I do in the theater class. And I agreed with him. I thought it was perfect for Friday the 13th. So what I'm going to do is actually talk about kind of the main, well, not really necessarily the main ones. I want to start off by saying that there are many, many, many superstitions that actually surround the theater and plays of note, and a lot of aspects of the theater that are very interesting. Some of these superstitions actually arise from practical reasons or practical events or safety practices or things that are actually necessary to perform theater well. Others have to do with the same things that a lot of superstitions have to do with, right? People making connections that seem kind of mysterious and maybe don't exactly have a purely logical explanation for them. I will also say that there are people within the theater community, some of whom honor a lot of these superstitions really just as a matter of tradition, and then other people who really, really, really believe in these superstitions. I will start off by saying that I am not a naturally superstitious person. Many of these superstitions I honor, though, when I'm in the theater and within the theater community, simply, of course, as a matter of tradition, and then also because I don't want to make anybody that I'm performing on stage with exceptionally or dangerously nervous. So that's a practical reason for that. Okay, so the title that I gave for this talk was Broken Legs, Bloody Hands, and Ghost Lights. So we're going to start off with those actual first three superstitions that I basically alluded to in the title. So the first thing that I want to bring up is the ghost light. Now, as a tradition in the theater, and this would be a thing that actually has a practical purpose. If any of you have actually been in a true theater, a theater that is basically built in the ideal fashion of a theater, when all of the lights are off, all of them, you cannot see your hand this close to your face. It is pitch black in there. Many of us today are really not even familiar with that level of darkness because there's always light pollution, especially if you're living in a metropolitan area. But in a theater, if the theater is built the way people who are in the theater community would like the theater to be built, it is that dark. You cannot see anything when you're in the room. So the purpose of the ghost light is that you actually leave this one light on, and it's usually just the way that you see it in the picture, in the middle of the stage, just a light on a pole, and the rest of the theater is dark. Now, what's a little bit misleading here is that we have all of these lights that are lit up in the house, which is the audience portion of the building. That typically won't happen, right? The only source of light in that theater space would be the ghost light. The superstition from this comes from basically a lot of superstitions surrounding spirits or apparitions that are said to haunt various theaters for different reasons. Most theaters have some sort of resident ghost, right, that they claim is haunting that space. And there are different stories surrounding these. A lot of them have to do with unfortunate accidents and even deaths from actors or technicians or even directors. Some of them have actually taken place on stage themselves. But basically, the superstition behind this is that you are turning all of the lights in the theater off when you leave, but you're leaving one on for the ghost, right? Because we don't want to anger the ghost by not leaving a light on for the ghost. But again, this superstition actually just comes out of a practical safety concern, right? You don't want to walk into a dark theater where you can't see a thing and then suddenly find that you've fallen to the bottom of the orchestra pit because you didn't see that it was open when you walked into the room. But this is the superstition of the ghost light. This is always called the ghost light, right? Make sure you leave the ghost light on when you leave the building. That's just what it's called. So the next superstition that I want to bring out is kind of a tradition, really, but it has to do with the idea that you don't ever want to wish an actor or a technician or anybody prior to a performance good luck. The superstition there is that it's bad luck to say good luck before a performance. What you're actually supposed to say instead is break a leg. Now, here's what's interesting about this. I get lots of questions. Why break a leg? Why do we say break a leg? Why would you wish someone to break a leg? And for any of you who are involved in sports at Founders, if I have ever accidentally, out of practice and tradition, accidentally wished you break a leg before a game, please know that it was simply because that's what I'm used to saying before a performance, and not that I really wish any of you would break a leg prior to a game or a meet or anything else. That's not the case. But the superstition is that it's bad luck to tell someone good luck before a performance. Now, what I would like to take just a minute to mention, to illustrate, is I want to take the opportunity to give you the definitive origin of break a leg, of why we say break a leg rather than good luck. And I can't, because nobody knows for certain exactly where this superstition arose. There are many, many theories. Some of the theories date back to ancient Greece, right? This is probably not the case. What I have on the keynote here are just a couple of little images that show just a few of the ideas for where people think break a leg originated from. The first one, and probably most plausible in my opinion, is the one that you see at the top of the actor actually bowing on stage after a performance. The most plausible theory, though we can't prove it, is that it basically came from a phrase meaning bend the knee as if in a bow, right? The idea would be behind that you are breaking the line of the leg by bending your knee to take a bow, right? Oh, whoops, hang on. Okay. That you are bending a knee and breaking the line of the leg to take a bow. Meaning that if you actually are successful in your performance and get to take a bow before the audience starts throwing rotten fruit and vegetables at you, that means it was a good performance because they let you finish it, right? One of the other theories is that this actually came about during vaudeville. And the kind of sepia image with the people in a line that you see right there is an actual image taken after a vaudeville act. And during the 1800s, when vaudeville was a thing, it was very common for theaters to basically just get people to come in and do kind of a variety show, right? If your talent was giving great dramatic speeches, then you would go and give a great dramatic speech. If your talent was training chickens to jump through hoops, then you would bring your performing chickens out to jump through hoops. If you were a singer, you sang. If you were an acrobat, you did acrobatics, right? And so there would be many people doing many things in the course of an evening during a performance. However, you had to show the owner of the theater right then what you could do before he would allow you to perform on stage. Now, what you'll see in the middle is a picture, an image, a rendering actually, of a curtain. And if you notice, the curtain that runs across the top of the proscenium is referred to generally as a border. The curtain that runs down the side is referred to as a leg, right? The idea was that if you actually got past the leg of the curtain out onto the stage to perform, then you had broken the leg to get onto the stage, which means your act was good enough to actually make it into the show. This is one of the theories as to where break a leg came from. You break the leg and actually get to perform, meaning that you're good enough to perform. Now, the one at the bottom is interesting. This is a theory that break a leg actually came from the assassination of President Lincoln. Can anybody tell me what John Wilkes Booth's profession was? Clay.
He was an actor.
John Wilkes Booth was an actor, and I will mention he was actually notable for being a good actor, okay? So after the assassination of President Lincoln, right, when he jumps down onto the stage and breaks his leg, right, many people believe or guess that this is actually where the origin of the phrase came from. Now, of course, the question is, why on earth would that be a good thing? He assassinates President Lincoln and then breaks his leg, right? Why would you wish that on anybody, right? This is why this is probably not the most plausible theory, but it's an interesting story, which is how many superstitions are born, right? Interesting stories. So essentially, the idea behind this is he's a notable actor, he's a good actor, but even good actors break a leg sometimes, right? And again, not the most plausible theory. We could actually spend 2 full class periods talking about the different theories for where break a leg came from. And the answer is we don't exactly know, but I would recommend, if you're interested, to look it up because there are many. Some of them go back to Elizabethan England, the Haymarket Theater, and again, ancient Greece, and all kinds of other things. And we don't really know, so it's a superstition or a tradition, however you look at it. Okay. So, the other thing that I mentioned on the flyer was bloody hands. Okay, can anybody tell me what reference bloody hands, or what connection there might be between bloody hands and the play that's mentioned here? Have any of you read Macbeth? Okay, so Macbeth is a play by William Shakespeare. It's a very dark play. And basically in the play, there is a murder committed. And at one point in the play, the person who commits the murder, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, the person who commits the murder is so overwhelmed with this heaviness of what has happened that she envisions that she's got blood on her hands and she just can't wash it off. And she keeps trying to wash her hands, but the blood won't come off. This is, of course, all in her head, but that's basically what happens in the play. Now, here's what's interesting. There is a very, very, very strong superstition about ever saying the word Macbeth inside a theater if it's not within the performance. Right? If you are actually performing for an audience Macbeth, then it's of course okay to say the name Macbeth. You have to. It's part of the line in the or in many of the lines of the play. But if you are not in the middle of a performance, you cannot say the word Macbeth in a theater. It makes people very, very, very uncomfortable. Now, for that reason, theatrical people almost never call this play Macbeth, which is the actual name of the play. They call it the Scottish play because it's actually set in Scotland. The idea behind why this has become a tradition has a lot to do with the darkness of the play itself, right? There are some witches involved, which is actually what you see in the image here from a stage version of Macbeth, who give Macbeth advice, right, on what he should do and how he should basically take over this throne. And there are a lot of theories as to why this has become so superstitious about saying the word Macbeth. A lot of people claim that there have been people who've died either during performances of it or after performances of it. There isn't actually any hard evidence indicating that this is really the case. There's also a legend that says that when William Shakespeare was actually writing the different parts, the incantations or whatever that the witches who were the philosophers, as it will, but not really, they're basically just telling him the future, right? There are many theories that the incantations that William Shakespeare actually used for these characters were actually real, and they came from actual witches at the time, and then a coven found out about it, and so they cursed the play for all time. Again, there's no historical evidence of any of this, but it has become a tradition and a superstition. Now, if you do ever make the mistake in the theater community of walking into a theater and saying Macbeth instead of the Scottish play, what usually happens is you will be forced to leave the theater and then enter back in with 1 foot, and then you have to subject yourself to what is known as the spinning forgiveness, which means you have to spin around in a circle. Well, first you have to ask permission to enter back into the room, and then somebody in the theater has to give you permission to come back in, and then you have to spin in a circle 7 times or 9, depending on who it is that you've offended, and then ask forgiveness from Dionysus, who was the ancient Greek patron god of theater, for just putting all this bad luck on the play by actually saying the word Macbeth in a theater. Just so all of you know, I don't believe that saying Macbeth in a theater is going to bring bad luck to the play. However, I would never, ever dream of offending any people in the theater community by actually saying the word Macbeth in the theater. So I caution you to do the same. Now, here's what, I don't have my watch. How much time do we have?
You have 10 minutes.
Oh, okay, we're good. Okay, does anybody have any questions about anything so far? Theo?
When you're saying you can't say Macbeth in a theater, is that anywhere that you're going to perform a play, or is that an actual theater?
Okay, that is a source of question, right? Most people would say that it really is something that's considered actually a theater, right? And technically speaking, I would tend to agree with that because, as you all know, you can perform plays in a lot of different places, but we wouldn't actually call those places theaters, right? A theater is a very specific type of building that's actually set up to see plays. That's actually where the word theater comes from. It's the Greek word meaning seeing place or viewing place. But if you're asking what I personally would do, if I were in the situation where even if it were an amphitheater or an outdoor space or something like that, that isn't an actual working theater, I would probably refrain from saying Macbeth just so that I wouldn't upset anybody. But actually the other thing too is, because of that and because of all the years that I've spent in theaters and performing, I generally refer to it as the Scottish play, in essence, just out of habit. But it is not uncommon, even on Broadway, if they are performing Macbeth, to see a sign on the door to the theater as you enter. If you have purchased tickets to see a production of Macbeth, to see a sign on the door as you enter asking all people who are coming to the show that night to refrain from using the word Macbeth within earshot of the producers of the performance, right? I would not recommend that you ever do that just to agitate someone. It's basically just not good manners. Okay. All right, does anybody else have any questions so far? I have some more that I basically have on deck just in case I had enough time to talk about some more. We may or may not get to all of them. AJ.
Is there a superstition with regarding the misspelling of theater?
There isn't a superstition regarding the misspelling of theater, but the correct spelling of live theater is T-H-E-A-T-R-E. T-H-E-A-T-E-R actually refers to a movie theater, right? And if it's live theater, it's supposed to be spelled R-E. It isn't a superstition, but it's good knowledge to have. Okay. So here are some more that I kind of just put in here. I didn't really know how long this would take, but and again, we have many more, but we're not going to have time for all of them. So the first one that I have on the list is no whistling in the theater. This is a superstition that's also actually based in practical safety. Theater has been around a long time, and for a long time traditionally, and even still, when you have scenery and pieces that are being dropped and raised for different scenes, those are run by a system of ropes and pulleys known as a fly system. Now, it was not uncommon, especially during the height of the old shipping eras, right, for sailors who were in port waiting for their next assignment to go back to actually take employment, temporary employment, working backstage in theaters, because they were not afraid of heights. They knew how to use ropes, they knew how to tie knots, and they also knew how to communicate to one another without actually talking. Do any of you know traditionally how sailors on ships would communicate with one another? Yes, Lakin, is that you? I didn't hear. No, they didn't use sign language. That's a good guess, though. Yes.
I'm gonna guess just whistling.
Whistling! Yes, they whistled. If any of you saw The Sound of Music, Captain Von Trapp has certain whistles for each of his children, right? That's why he was a ship captain, and they would use specific combinations of whistling sounds to give very specific signals to one another as they're working the riggings on ships. So, if you were in the middle of a production in the 1800s or the 1700s or the 1600s, and you have a bunch of sailors backstage running the ropes with big heavy flats and backdrops on them, you don't want to make the mistake of whistling a happy tune in the theater and inadvertently using a very specific sailor signal that causes someone to drop a flat on your head, right? It's a safety precaution, and then from there is where we actually get the superstition. So it still is a superstition, but not really a safety precaution anymore, because we don't often have people who are sailors communicating by whistles running riggings in theaters. Okay. Okay. So here's an interesting one. I'm gonna skip down here to dark, not closed. So, if any of you ever go to see a production on Broadway in New York, or off Broadway, which is any theater in LA, what you will find is that Mondays are usually the days that the theaters are dark. We do not say that they are closed, right? if you go to Brahms because you want ice cream and it's 2 a.m. and you can't get ice cream, you would say, I can't get ice cream because Brahms is closed, right? Now, that doesn't mean that Brahms is closed forever. It just means that it's closed until they're open again, right? And then you could go get ice cream. But in theater terminology, it's something different. Closed is only what you say when a show will not be running anymore. So if a show only runs through, 2022 and then it closes, that means it's closed. So what you don't want to say is the theaters are closed on Mondays, because they're not closed on Mondays. They're simply dark, meaning they're not running a show on that night, right? Actors need 1 day a week where they're not having to perform. The reason for this is actually based in a superstition, because when the theaters were officially closed, does anybody know when that was? Any ideas? Historically, when would there be a famous period in history that all the theaters would be closed? Yes. Is that Annabelle?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am. So World War II.
It wasn't World War II. Sander?
The plague?
The plague! Yes. During the plague, they actually closed the theaters to keep people from dying, right? And so, because of that, we don't want to say on a night that is not running a play that the theater is closed, because that's bad luck. We don't want the show closed, we just want a night off, right? And that's where the superstition has actually come from. Where are we on time? Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
Okay, so it's like the spinning around and all the ritualistic things like that. Since a lot of the theater is based in pagan traditions, in the theaters they seem dark and gloomy just in general. Not only that, with their association with pagan religion, it almost feels like it is just a continuation of those ancient religions.
Yeah, it could definitely be interpreted that way. There was actually a time where if you were an actor, you weren't allowed to be buried in hollowed ground in a Christian cemetery, because you were not considered of a caliber just by the nature of being an actor that you should be allowed to be buried there. In fact, Moliere was actually buried at night after he died on stage, hemorrhaging, in fact, on stage, but wanted to finish his performance. But because he was an actor, they agreed to bury him at night so that people didn't know that he was being buried in an actual Christian cemetery. So that's definitely another theory. All right, well, I guess it's time to let you